Donald Trump left China this week full of apparent good feelings towards Chinese leader Xi Jinping, but without many concrete details on a number of issues like trade, tech, and Taiwan. Joining me now to discuss the summit are Matthew Pottinger, the former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor and the point man on China in Donald Trump's first term, and Jessica Chen Weiss, Professor of China Studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Jessica, let me begin with you and ask you, what was notable to you about this summit? What did you see that was, for you, striking?
Well, I think contra expectations that, Xi Jinping was going to eat Trump's lunch, I actually think that the summit showed that what China really wants is stability, not to bury the United States or race for hegemony, and that in fact the priority that the Xi Jinping and his CCP leadership place on a stable external environment to continue to buy time for their own development amidst domestic economic challenges is, for me, the biggest takeaway that we should all be keeping in mind.
Matt, you wrote an article in the Financial Times, I think it was, saying beware of the gifts that Xi Jinping might bestow on Trump as kind of Trojan horses. A deal on chips, a peace gesture on Taiwan, investment in U.S. manufacturing. He didn't do any of those. Why do you think, and what's your read on the summit?
Yeah, look, Fareed, you said at the top that the Nixon moment in China is the wrong analogy, and I think you're right about that. But what I think the correct analogy is Nixon's policy towards the Soviet Union. That was the détente policy. That was, understandable at the time why we pursued détente vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. We were stuck in a war that we were losing in Vietnam. President Nixon wanted to go into talks on strategic arms limitation with the Soviets. So he went towards a more accommodating sort of posture towards the Soviets. And I think this was really a détente policy in both directions, from Beijing and from President Trump towards Beijing. The challenge is to not let that policy become a parody of itself over time, which is what happened to the détente policy of the 1970s. The Soviet Union used that time to basically run buck wild around the world. They were launching insurgencies in the Horn of Africa and Angola and across Latin America, and even trying to start a revolution in Portugal. And so by the time the end of the 70s came around, the Carter administration, Brzezinski, saw the Soviets invade Afghanistan. He said that was the final nail in the coffin of détente. So détente became a parody of itself, and that's what we have to guard against this time.
Jessica, what do you make of that argument that, the Chinese are, as you put it, biding their time, building their strength, but they are continuing to build, military facilities in the South China Seas. They are continuing to increase the number of overflights to Taiwan and demand unification there. They are continuing to steal American intellectual property. In other words, there is a kind of, underneath the détente, there is a Chinese policy that is fairly aggressive.
I think it's quite clear that what China wants is to protect their sovereignty, to preserve the security of the Chinese Communist Party leadership with Xi Jinping at the helm, and to continue to develop into the sort of modern country that they have wanted. But I think the biggest threat here to détente is not that we actually get there, but that we fail to because of Trump's kind of volatile tendency to flip-flop, right? For example, after the summit, he said he welcomed Chinese investment and up to 500,000 Chinese students, but his policies and the Republican Party's policies have been anything but welcoming. Trump has, prioritized business deals over the kinds of economic gains that would make Americans' lives more affordable. And then, on Taiwan, he's been highly erratic, and I think that the essence of preserving peace and stability is, calm and credible assurances as well as threats. And he's, not been calm or credible, I think, on either score. In fact, he shouldn't be telling reporters that U.S. arms to Taiwan are a bargaining chip for economic or trade concessions. So I have a lot of questions about this, and I think that we do need a growing effort to avoid war with China. But whether he can get us there, I count me skeptical. And so before we sort of dismiss détente, I think we need to give it a fair shot.
Matt, give me your sense of Taiwan, because you have briefed Trump many times on the issue. What I'm struck when I listen to him, and you saw that in that interview that Jessica was mentioning, you can tell he doesn't really think that this is a vital strategic interest for the United States. He said, look, it's 59 miles away for them, it's tens of thousands of miles away for us. And then he disparaged them, saying, they've stolen our chip industry. That doesn't sound like a president who is going to come to Taiwan's aid, don't you think?
Well, look, I think President Trump, from my briefings of him in the first administration, certainly I think he understood that it is a vital interest of the United States. If Taiwan were coercively annexed by the Chinese Communist Party, you could kiss goodbye most of President Trump's agenda, including allowing the United States to win the race in AI, and more than that, just to remain a technological superpower. So what he's doing is trying to bring more of the chip manufacturing to the United States. That's a very wise policy, but it's going to take a lot longer than I think many people in the administration realize. So in the meantime, he's trying not to provoke, but so long as he continues to provide armaments for Taiwan's defense, continues to help Taiwan provide for itself, I think that we can maintain deterrence, and that's the name of the game here.
Matt, what would you do about those arms sales? Would you hold them up as he has and try to get the Chinese to give something in return for kind of canceling them, or would you just make them go ahead?
I don't think. I know he used that phrase, but if you look at the policies he pursued in his first term and so far in this term, I think he's followed through on providing armaments. It would be a big mistake not to provide those armaments. Beijing would pocket that, and it would actually undermine the whole concept of peace through strength, which applies to Taiwan just as much as it applies to the United States. They've got to be able to provide for their defense, and we are the lifeline for that, since so many other countries are timid and unwilling to sell armaments to Taiwan. It's really important for Taiwan to spend more on its own defense as well, and to build up its own defense industrial base. Taiwan should be the dominant producer of drones. They've got all the expertise. They've got all of the technological supply chains right there in their home. But they need to spend more to actually build that out.
Jessica, what do you make of the claim that Xi Jinping wants to annex Taiwan by 2027? And my sense is that's a kind of misreading of what he said. He said he wanted the military modernized by 2027, and we can see by the chaos in the People's Liberation Army what he was talking about. But it wasn't a specific directive to be ready to take over Taiwan. Or am I misreading it?
Well, I very much agree. I don't think that he has set a deadline to take the island. And in fact, many estimates suggest that the wholesale purge of the top military brass has set China's capabilities back by maybe even a decade. And so this is not a conflict that I think either the United States or China are racing towards. And in fact, I think one of the hard truths that we need to face up to, both sides need to face up to, is that there is no military solution to this kind of political impasse, and that more sustained and creative diplomacy is the only way forward to preserve, as the Chinese said, the shared interest in peace and stability, across the Taiwan Strait. But while I think we often focus on the military dimension, I think it's really important that the stabilization of U.S.-China economic ties is actually a critical component to China's belief that it can wait on the Taiwan issue, that in fact that kind of belief that time is on China's side, that China will become more developed, and over time the situation will resolve itself, is actually critical to deterrence. And so one of the reasons why, despite my critiques of how Trump has gone about this, I think it is really important that we find a more stable floor for a kind of mutually beneficial economic trade and investment ties between the United States and China.
Matt, I've got 30 seconds, but I do want to hear you on, basically, how disappointed are you? Was this as Jessica says, we created a new stable relationship, or have we been lulled into complacency and the Chinese are going to take advantage?
Like I said, it's a détente policy. President Trump has got a lot going on right now with Venezuela, potentially Cuba, a war in Iran. So it makes sense that he would sequence his strategy. The traps that he's got to avoid are allowing Chinese investment in the United States. By the way, France just released a report called The Chinese Steamroller, showing that Chinese foreign direct investment into Europe has destroyed jobs, not creating them. This isn't Japan, okay? This is a predatory system. So he's got to avoid that trap. He's got to also avoid giving China a leg up on AI. If he does those things, we're going to be just fine.
So I got to disagree with that,
Matt?
though. I think that
Go ahead,
we
go
got
ahead quickly.
we got to train with, not just against Chinese companies who are in many cases out in front of the United States on EVs, robotics, et cetera. So just keeping them out isn't the solution to getting ahead.
All right, we will have to have this conversation again, but I very much want to. Both of you, just terrific. Thank you for your perspectives. Next up on GPS, inflation is spiking in the U.S. How much of this is due to Iran and what will happen? Jason Furman up next. According to the Consumer Price Index data, U.S. inflation rose to 3.8% in April. That's the highest rate of inflation in almost 3 years, in part due to the Iran war. Americans are feeling the economic pain. Meanwhile, the stock market has kept going up. What should we make of all this? Joining me now is Jason Furman. He's a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School and the former chair of the Council on Economic Advisors under President Obama. Jason, thanks for coming. So first explain to us, how significant is the rise in inflation? And let's take a kind of a best case scenario, which is the Iran war is resolved in, let's say 6 weeks. Does it persist or does it rapidly come down?
Yeah, so Fareed, you have to understand there's two big things going on in the economy right now. One of them is the Iran war. The second is the enormous demand from the AI build-out. Both of those are adding to inflation. One of them is helping the economy, one of them is hurting the economy, so they're canceling out to a draw when it comes to something like the unemployment rate. When you're thinking about inflation going forward, I think the Iran war part of it could probably be transitory, but I say probably because it depends on the degree to which it gets built into people's expectations. The AI build out and the extra demand from that actually might have more of a permanent component to it.
So when you look at the micro data in the U.S. economy, earnings, and not just of AI companies, but earnings in general, fairly strong. The stock market keeps going up. Unemployment rate still very, very low. I guess it's not micro. I'm going to mix some of the data points seem to be very positive. And then you look at inflation, you look at consumer sentiment, it's very bad. What is the picture of the economy? I saw somebody say the U.S. economy is weak in every way except it is one massive bet on artificial intelligence, which is keeping it going.
Yeah, I think that's about right. A really disproportionate share of our economic growth over the last year has come from that one sector, from building data centers, from building the power that they need. And you can look at different parts of financial markets and they tell you about different parts of the economy. So the stock market tells you what you expect corporate earnings to be, but it also tells you about risk, inflation, and it's all bundled together. And on balance, the higher expected earnings are dominating everything else. That's why it's done well. But then look over at the bond market. That doesn't care about corporate earnings. All it really cares about is risk, expected inflation, those types of things. It's a really pure measure of that. And interest rates are incredibly high. They rose a lot over the last week. The 30-year is the highest in nearly 2 decades. And you're going to start to see that, by the way, in mortgage rates. So it's going to be really concrete and tangible for American families.
So in the 1970s, we had a Middle East war. We had energy prices go up by a lot more. Energy prices tripled after the oil crisis. And we had a president, Richard Nixon, who bullied the Fed chairman to lower interest rates. And that time, the Fed Chairman Arthur Burns agreed to be bullied. And the result was we got a combination of slow growth and high inflation, which people call stagflation. What's the danger of something like that happening this time around?
Look, I think it's a danger. It's one I'm going to be watching closely and certainly commenting on and warning if I see it materialize. But right now, I'm cautiously optimistic. The incoming chair, Kevin Warsh, I didn't love everything he said to get the job, but he's a serious person. He's going to care about his standing in history. I don't think he's going to want to badly mess things up. And the other thing to understand is interest rates are set by a committee of 12 people. It's a majority vote. The chair is 1 out of 12 votes. And right now, the committee is thinking in a very independent way. The last meeting, 4 different members dissented. And so I don't think the chair can walk in there and say, here's what Donald Trump wants, here's what we're going to do. He's going to have analytically persuasive arguments, or the committee's just going to say, no, we're going to vote on something else. So I think there's some real checks and balances there. I feel okay about it, but I don't feel 100%, so I'll be watching carefully.
Quickly, we don't have a lot of time, but Kevin Warsh has struck me most of his life as an inflation hawk. When you were in the White House, he was assailing you guys. He was saying there was too much quantitative easing. The Fed was being essentially too dovish. It feels like he's somehow convinced Trump he's dovish on inflation. Do you share my view that underneath there's somebody who's generally speaking wanted rates higher for the last 20 years?
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, Donald Trump, I think, was nervous about this. He probably would have named him a year ago if he thought he would do his bidding. But I think what he was going through his head is, this is a credible person. Financial markets respect him. But I'm nervous that he's too independent, that he's not going to do what I want. And that's why he dithered, tried other options, thought about other things, and eventually came back to Kevin Warsh. So I don't think he was exactly what Donald Trump wants. I think it's possible he'll be closer to something that the rest of us want. But again, we'll have to wait and see. And the other thing about Kevin Warsh is he's been a real critic of the Fed. He's never said exactly what he's going to do differently. And so trying to understand what his affirmative vision is and how he fleshes that out is still a little bit unclear. And I'll be watching all of that as we go forward.
Jason Furman, thank you. That was so helpful. Next on GPS, Israel is one of America's strongest allies, but according to recent polls, it is rapidly losing support among the American public. I will explore this with the Israeli-American historian, Omar Batov, next.